Today we're going to talk about Bible repetition. Repetition in the Bible. I think this is something that not many people pick up on. If you hear birds singing in the background, I'm sort of in a park at the moment, so yeah, I don't think you'll find a lot of this around. There are different examples of repetition in the Bible. One of the obvious ones I've noticed is, say, the words of Jesus. When he says verily, which is in the King James Version of the Bible, and he says, which translates to truly in the modern day versions, when he says verily, verily, it's repetition, isn't it? And that's the obvious one. I think there's only a number of times he does that. He's saying this is very, very important. Truly, truly, I say to you. Then you need to sit up and take notice. Any repetition that's coming from the Lord, you need to take notice of. Another example is the day of the Lord, isn't it? The day of the Lord is mentioned, I think I see it somewhere, it came up 98 times, but it's not exactly the same words that are mentioned in, say, like the 6th seal of Revelation. There's debate about that, isn't there, whether it is the day of the Lord. I think it is. I think most people think that that sign is unmistakable and it's the day of the Lord, isn't it? Well, it's repeated a number of times, isn't it? In Acts, it's repeated in the Old Testament, the old prophets. It's mentioned a number of times, isn't it? And you realise that obviously has got some importance, hasn't it? And then you'll find other things are repeated, you know, but sometimes I use repetition. If sometimes something's put in my heart or it's put in my mind, and I know it's come from the Lord, and what I do is I check to see whether it has come from the Lord when I see repetition. Sometimes I just type it into the Bible app, this phrase or whatever it is, and that's what I do. I type it in, and it comes up with whatever it is, and you see the number of verses, and you see it's repeated. This is the thing, when you see phrases or just words that come into your head, when you start doing this stuff, you've got to check that what you're doing, you know, that phrase does tie up, it cross-refers, but what's the context? Yeah, always check the context. What's the context of the original verse, and then what's the context of the other verses? If the other contexts are completely different, you have to read the whole chapter to get the context, doesn't it? Get what I'm saying? So, but repetition is a very good way to, if you're hearing things like I do, we all do, don't we? You know, sometimes that Bible, you drop it on the floor, the hard copy, and it lands on a certain page, and you look, and something's leaping out. Or sometimes you just got an urge to read Isaiah 11, or wherever it is, I don't know. You know, these things, it's not coming from you, is it? It's coming from the Lord. He's trying to show you something. Yeah? And I find these things, they tend to take you on a journey. But like I said, repetition can be used to verify, you know, like I get a lot of comments on the channel, and people are saying, well, it's this, and this, and you're wrong, or it's, you know, they just out of politeness saying, you know, it could be this, and this, you know, and I think, okay, it could be. But when you start cross-referring, you realise that, or looking for repetition, and it's the same context, the context is, it only comes up one time, you know, and you realise it's not confirmed, you know, and you need to, and that's what I'm saying, using repetition, biblical repetition has been put there as a form of confirmation. Yeah, if you're hearing things from the Spirit, this is what I find, not only will you get some verse will come in your mind, and you may know what the verse is, but you have to type it in the Bible app, and then what will happen is you'll be led somewhere else, yeah, and you'll see 2-3 other verses that you would never find in a million years, and you look, it's the same thing, exactly the same thing. Yeah, the day of the Lord will be a prime example. Other examples of repetition is, you see it in the Old Testament. I think, is it Chronicles and Kings? When you read them, they sound very similar, don't they? There's a repetition there, but the Lord has done it there for a reason, isn't it? Also, you will find there's repetition in the Gospels, isn't there? They are a variation on the theme, but Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, they're all telling the same story, aren't they? But some don't mention the birth, some do. Some take a sort of more convoluted approach to it, isn't it? John, Matthew, I would say, is probably the main one, isn't it? You know, they've all got their own approach to it, but they're all the variation on the thing, on the theme, aren't they? And you can read about the crucifixion and hear the different angles on it, isn't it? You know, how it came about. All the life of Jesus, you can see. Why is it repeated? It's confirmation, isn't it? It's confirmation that these things actually happened. 4 different people saw this. It's very important, isn't it? Because otherwise you just got one person, then it doesn't mean anything. So that's another confirmation there. 4 different witnesses, the Gospels, isn't it, to the birth and death of Jesus. Yeah? 4 different Gospels. And that is a living example that repetition is very important. Yeah? I mean, you can think of other examples, like a lot of prophecies. You see a lot of the stuff from Jeremiah, Daniel, Ezekiel, and you see them. And you look and you think, this stuff's mentioned in Revelation. Yeah? It's repeated, isn't it? Revelation repeats what's going on. Also the judgments of the Lord, isn't it? If you remember Exodus, there's a giant hail mentioned in Revelation, isn't it? It's kind of the way of talents. I'm not sure how big the hail was, but it was heavy enough to break down branches on trees. Probably not as, but again, he uses hail, doesn't he? As an example, giant hail. It was used in Exodus, in Egypt, as a judgment, wasn't it? If you take, say, the Tower of Babel was destroyed, Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed, wasn't it? He uses the same thing. And this is the thing. The bottom line of this repetition, this biblical repetition, is it's saying that the Lord doesn't change over time. Yeah, he stays the same. He's constant. Yeah, the world changes, but the Lord doesn't. And his word doesn't either. Yeah. So, yeah, whatever was said in the Old Testament, he's pretty much saying the same thing in the New Testament. The times have changed, yeah, but it's the same thing, isn't it? I just thought I'd share that with you. Look for repetition in the Bible. Yeah, if you've got a Bible app on your phone, it's fascinating. Just typing in a word, you know, and just see what comes up. You know, you can type in, I don't know, tribulation, or you can type in whatever word you think of, and you'll come up with a load of verses. Sometimes you come up with nothing, you know. But I strongly recommend these Bible apps that you get on, you know, on your laptop or PC. They tend to be more powerful. You know, they really, you can put strings of words in, you can put all sorts of phrases and expressions. But the next time you get something that comes in your head, if you're in the faith and you're ignoring these things, try it. And that's the Lord communicating with you, and you'll get confirmation. Yeah, because as I said in my previous video, when I was talking about, you know, what the first horseman of the apocalypse could be, and we come up with about 8 or 9 different, well, even 10 different answers, you know. And I said everybody's hearing in the Spirit, and they're praying in the Spirit, and they say pray for understanding, all the rest of it, and they're coming up with 10 different answers. You know, there's other spirits out there. Yeah, and this biblical repetition is a way to filter out things that you may be hearing, things trying to communicate with you. Yeah, and you get some idea in your head, check it against Scripture, and then look for repetition. The Spirit will guide you, yeah, and you'll see it repeated at least 2-3 times, at least. Yeah, if it's just a one verse and there's no confirmation anywhere else. Confirmation, that's what I'm calling it. Biblical repetition is confirmation that what you're hearing is from the Lord. Yeah, because that Bible is a spider's web. It is. That's the way it's laid out. And as I said before, the Old and the New Testaments, they're not separate books. They're both intertwined. Yeah, and they're both connected. You can't disconnect one from the other, because the Lord that's in the Old Testament is exactly the same Lord as in the New Testament, isn't it? But that's it. I mean, I'll leave some examples of sort of things that have repeated themselves. But the treasury of Scripture knowledge picks up on this stuff, things that are repeated. And certainly if you look at an old Bible, it'll have the letter A, B, C, D in the verses, or whatever it is, isn't it? All the way through E, F, right all the way through the alphabet. Look at those things. Look at the footnotes, and it will take you on a journey. And I think this is very, very important to do. But anyway, this is Frank of the 12 Gates. Keep your eyes firmly fixed on the Lord. Peace, love and joy.